Put your finger on the side of your nose, either side. Now push one nostril closed and breathe in through the open one. Hold it. Now switch. Close the other side and breathe through the first one again. One of those was easier. You felt it. One side just opened up, and the air came through without any fuss. The other side, you had to pull a little harder. It felt narrower, like somebody had put a little cushion in there. Now, most people, when they notice this, they think, oh, I must be a little congested. I'm getting a cold. Something's wrong with me. And they reach for the nasal spray, or they blow their nose, or they just ignore it. But see, what you just felt is not a malfunction. What you just felt is one of the oldest pieces of biological engineering in your body doing exactly what it is supposed to do. And here is the thing that nobody tells you. That asymmetry, the fact that one nostril is more open than the other right now, is not random. It is timed. It is oscillating. And it is controlling things inside you that you would never in a million years guess had anything to do with your nose. So let me take this apart for you. Because once you see what is happening, once you really see the physics and the physiology of it, you will never think about breathing the same way again. All right. First, the anatomy. And I want you to pay attention to this because the anatomy is stranger than you think. Your nose is not one tube. It is two. There is a wall down the middle, the nasal septum, made of cartilage in the front and bone in the back, and it divides your nasal cavity into two completely separate passages, left and right. Each one has its own blood supply, its own nerves, its own set of three curled bony shelves that stick out from the side wall like little curved fins, and these are called turbinates. Now the bottom turbinate on each side, the inferior turbinate, is the big one. It is about the size of your finger. And the lining of this turbinate, the mucosa, is thick and rich with blood vessels. But here is the part that surprises people. Buried inside that lining is a network of large blood vessels called venous sinusoids. And these sinusoids are functionally erectile tissue, the same kind of tissue you find in the genitals. It can fill with blood and swell, fast, in minutes. And when it swells, that turbinate gets so fat it practically touches the septum, and it blocks the airway on that side almost completely. Now the two sides do this in opposition. When the left turbinate swells up, the right one drains down. When the right one blocks, the left one opens. And then, after some time, anywhere from about 25 minutes to as long as 8 hours, they switch. The swollen one drains. The open one fills up. And the dominant nostril flips. A German doctor named Richard Kaiser described this in 1895. He called it the nasal cycle. And for 100 years after that, everybody treated it as a curiosity, a little quirk of nasal anatomy. Nobody thought it mattered. It matters enormously. And the reason it matters takes us from the nose into the hypothalamus, from the hypothalamus into the autonomic nervous system, from the autonomic nervous system into the brain, and from the brain into a molecule so important that the pharmaceutical industry charges over $100 an hour to deliver it from a gas cylinder. Let me take you through each one. The nasal cycle is not run by the nose. It is run by the hypothalamus, which is a little structure at the base of the brain, about the size of an almond. The hypothalamus is the conductor of the autonomic nervous system, which is the system that manages all the things you do not consciously control. Your heart rate, your digestion, your blood pressure, the dilation of your pupils. All of it is coordinated by this tiny piece of brain sitting right above the brainstem. Now, the autonomic nervous system has two branches. The sympathetic branch, which is the one that gets you ready for action, fight or flight, elevated heart rate, glucose released into the blood, everything accelerated. And the parasympathetic branch, which is the one that slows things down, rest and digest. Heart rate drops, blood pressure eases, the body goes into repair mode. And here is the key to the whole story. The hypothalamus does not send the same signal to both sides of the body at the same time. It lateralizes. The sympathetic signal it sends to the right side of the body can be different from the signal it sends to the left. And the nasal cycle is the most visible marker of this lateralized oscillation. When the hypothalamus sends a sympathetic pulse to the right side of the nose, the right turbinate decongests, the vessels constrict, the tissue shrinks, and the right nostril opens wide. At the same time, the left side gets a parasympathetic signal. The left turbinate engorges, and the left passage narrows. And the reverse is true when it switches. Now this is where it gets really interesting. The nerve fibers that decongest the right turbinate are not special nasal nerves. They are branches of the same sympathetic chain that innervates the heart on that side, the lungs, the adrenal gland, the blood vessels. So when the right nostril opens, you are not just getting more air through the right side of your nose. Your entire right-sided sympathetic tone is elevated. Heart rate goes up a little. Blood glucose goes up. Oxygen consumption increases. The body shifts into a more active, alert state. And when the left nostril takes over, the parasympathetic system dominates. Heart rate slows. Blood pressure drops. Galvanic skin response increases, which is a marker that the body is relaxing. The whole organism shifts into recovery mode. Now, people have measured this. Shirley Tellis and her group at the Patanjali Research Institute in India did a beautifully simple experiment. They had people breathe through just the left nostril, not for hours, not for days, for 27 breaths. And after 27 breaths, systolic blood pressure dropped, pulse pressure narrowed, and heart rate decreased. 27 breaths through one nostril. That was enough to move the autonomic needle. And then Pal and colleagues at the Jawaharlal Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research in Pondicherry took it further. They had 85 people practice single nostril breathing for 1 hour a day, 6 weeks straight. One group breathed only through the right nostril. Another group breathed only through the left. After 6 weeks, the groups had measurably diverged. The right nostril group had shifted towards sympathetic dominance. Their heart rate variability ratio, which is a standard clinical index of sympathetic versus parasympathetic balance, had gone up. The left nostril group had shifted the other way, more parasympathetic. Lower heart rate, lower blood pressure. So think about what this means. Which nostril is open right now is not a trivial detail. It is a readout of which branch of your entire autonomic nervous system is running the show at this moment. And this is important, because the wrong nostril is not a nostril that is broken. It is a nostril that is dominant at the wrong time. If you are trying to fall asleep and your right nostril is wide open, your body is in sympathetic mode, fight or flight mode, and you are lying in bed wondering why your mind will not shut off. If you are trying to give a presentation and your left nostril is dominant, your parasympathetic system is pulling you toward rest and repair while you need alertness and verbal fluency. The cycle has its own schedule, and it does not consult your calendar. When the cycle gets stuck, when one side stays dominant for too long because you have been sleeping on the same side all night, or because you have been spraying decongestant into both nostrils for 3 years, you are holding the autonomic thermostat in one position. And the cardiovascular system notices. Now, here is the next link in the chain, and this is the one that really grabbed me when I first understood it. The signal does not stop at the heart. It goes into the brain. Specifically, it goes into the hemispheres. In 1987, Deborah Wernz and David Shanahoff Khalsa at the University of California, San Diego were recording EEG, electroencephalographic activity, across both hemispheres of the brain while simultaneously tracking which nostril was dominant. And what they found was not a loose correlation. It was a tight coupling. When the right nostril was dominant, the left hemisphere showed greater electrical activity. When the left nostril took over, the right hemisphere lit up. The nasal cycle and the alternation of cerebral hemispheric dominance were oscillating in lockstep, contralaterally. Now, Shanahoff Khalsa spent the next 30 years studying this at the Biocircuits Institute at UC San Diego. He called it the lateralized ultradian rhythm. Ultradian means faster than once per day. This rhythm cycles every 90 to 200 minutes when you are awake, roughly 100 minutes during sleep. And it couples the nasal cycle not only to hemispheric EEG activity, but also to alternating levels of catecholamines in the blood, measured independently in the left and right arms. It couples to pituitary hormone secretion, and it maps directly onto the structure of sleep. Listen to this. Greater left hemisphere EEG power correlates with REM sleep, the phase where dreaming and memory consolidation happen. Greater right hemisphere power correlates with deep non-REM stage 4 sleep, which is the phase of maximum tissue repair, immune restoration, and growth hormone release. And the nasal cycle tracks both states. During REM, the left nostril tends toward dominance. During deep slow-wave sleep, the right nostril opens. So the nasal cycle is not merely reflecting what the brain is doing. It is part of the machinery that cycles the sleeping brain through its repair and consolidation phases. When you disrupt the nasal cycle, you are potentially interfering with the oscillation between REM and deep sleep. And the consequences of disrupted sleep architecture, impaired memory, elevated cortisol, reduced growth hormone, accelerated cognitive decline, those are not speculative. Those are some of the most robustly documented findings in all of sleep medicine. Now, there is a practical piece to this that I find delightful. When the right nostril dominates during the day, your left hemisphere is more active. That means verbal tasks are easier. Logical sequencing is sharper. Analytical reasoning is more fluid. When the left nostril opens and the right hemisphere takes over, spatial reasoning improves. Pattern recognition gets better. Creative association, the ability to see connections between things that do not obviously belong together, peaks. So you have been walking around your entire life with a readout of your current cognitive state available at the tip of your finger, and you never checked it. The wrong nostril is not a defect. It is a timing mismatch. You are trying to write a legal argument while your brain is in spatial mode. You are trying to navigate a new city while your cortex is optimized for sequential logic, and your nose has been telling you which mode you are in the whole time. But there is another layer, and this one involves chemistry. Specifically, it involves a gas that nobody expected to find inside your skull at the concentrations they measured. In 1995, John Lundberg and Eddie Weitzberg at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm were measuring gases in the nasal airways, and they found nitric oxide inside the paranasal sinuses at concentrations that were, frankly, startling. The paranasal sinuses are 4 pairs of air-filled cavities sitting behind your cheekbones, above your eyebrows, between your eyes, and deep behind the nasal cavity. And inside those cavities, the nitric oxide levels were approaching the maximum concentrations allowed by atmospheric pollution regulations. Not trace amounts, not micrograms. Concentrations so high they would set off an industrial air quality alarm if you found them in a factory. They published this in Nature Medicine. And here is what they discovered. The epithelial cells lining the sinuses are constitutively expressing a form of nitric oxide synthase. Constitutively. That means it runs all the time. It does not need to be triggered by infection or inflammation. It does not need a stimulus. It just produces nitric oxide continuously, filling the sinus cavities with this gas around the clock. Lundberg identified it as a novel hybrid enzyme, calcium-independent and steroid non-responsive. Corticosteroid nasal sprays, which are the standard pharmaceutical treatment for nasal inflammation, do not suppress this enzyme. It keeps going regardless. It was built to keep going. And here is how they confirmed the sinuses were the source. Patients with Cartagener syndrome, a genetic condition where the sinuses are absent or non-functional, show virtually no nitric oxide in their exhaled nasal breath. Take away the sinuses, the nitric oxide disappears. It was not coming from the nasal mucosa, not from the lungs, from the sinuses. Those 4 pairs of cavities that most people think of only when they get a sinus infection are in fact chemical factories running a 24-hour production line. Now, nitric oxide is an extraordinary molecule. It relaxes the smooth muscle around blood vessels, so it lowers blood pressure. It opens the airways in the lungs, so it improves breathing. It kills bacteria, fungi, and viruses on contact, and it signals through a very specific cascade. When nitric oxide reaches the smooth muscle cells lining the pulmonary arteries, it activates an enzyme called soluble guanylate cyclase, which converts GTP into cyclic GMP, which directly relaxes the muscle fiber. The vessel widens. Pulmonary vascular resistance drops. Gas exchange across the alveolar membrane improves. And now think about the nasal cycle. When a nostril is open, air flows briskly past the sinus ostia, the small drainage openings where each sinus connects to the nasal passage. That airflow creates a pressure differential that pulls nitric oxide out of the sinus cavities and carries it down into the lungs. When the cycle switches and that nostril congests, airflow slows. The ostia on that side become partially occluded. The sinus cavities stop flushing their nitric oxide and start refilling. Meanwhile, the opposite nostril has opened, and its sinuses are now dumping their accumulated nitric oxide into the airstream. The nasal cycle is a gas delivery system. It alternates which set of sinuses is flushing their nitric oxide reserves into the lungs. Left side opens, left sinuses flush. Right side opens, right sinuses flush. No cavity sits stagnant for too long. Each reservoir fills during its congested phase and empties during its open phase. And there is a secondary function that is just beautiful. The different airflow velocities in the open versus partially closed nostril create two different sampling modes for airborne chemicals reaching the olfactory epithelium. The open side delivers fast, high-volume flow that carries volatile molecules rapidly past the smell receptors. The partially closed side creates slower, more turbulent flow that allows heavier molecules to settle onto receptor surfaces they would otherwise miss. Your sense of smell is not static. It oscillates between two sampling modes. And the nasal cycle is the oscillator. When the cycle breaks, when one side stays congested or both nostrils block at once, the flushing stops. Sinuses that should be ventilating start accumulating gas in sealed chambers. Bacteria colonize. The lungs get less of the molecule that was opening their blood vessels and sterilizing their incoming air. Chronic sinusitis, recurrent respiratory infections, elevated pulmonary vascular resistance. These are not separate diseases. They are downstream consequences of a stuck oscillation in the erectile tissue behind your nose. Now here is a piece of this that most people do not know about. Your body has a way of resetting the nasal cycle mechanically, and you use it every single night. When you lie on your side, the weight of your shoulder and rib cage pressing into the mattress compresses the axillary region on the downside. And this triggers a sympathetic reflex that decongests the upper nostril and congests the lower one. Researchers at the University of Lagos demonstrated this in 1991. Within 3 to 4 minutes of lying on one side, airflow between the two nostrils began equalizing. By the 11th minute, dominance had fully reversed. The nostril that had been blocked was now open. This was not gravity draining mucus. This was a neural reflex. Sympathetic activation triggered by pressure on the lateral body wall, executing a complete reversal of turbinate erectile tissue state in under 12 minutes. Every time you roll over in bed, you are triggering this reflex. You switch nostril dominance, which switches autonomic lateralization, which shifts hemispheric activation, which nudges the brain from one sleep phase toward the next. Rolling over is not restlessness. It is the body using its own weight to keep the ultradian clock running. The person who sleeps frozen in one position all night, pinned on one side for 7 or 8 hours, is holding the nasal cycle in one state the entire time. One set of sinuses ventilates while the other 4 cavities stagnate. One hemisphere stays persistently more active. The oscillation between REM and deep sleep loses its mechanical reset signal, and that person wakes up congested, unrested, and unable to figure out why. Now I want to be honest with you about the evidence, because that is what we do. We do not oversell. The nasal cycle itself is rock solid. It has been measured in thousands of subjects over more than 130 years using every nasal airflow technique that exists. The periodicity, the erectile tissue mechanism, the autonomic control, all confirmed and replicated many times over. The sympathetic and parasympathetic lateralization is strong. Multiple independent groups have confirmed that right nostril dominance correlates with sympathetic activation and left with parasympathetic tone. The cardiovascular data from TELUS and PAL is internally consistent and makes physiological sense given what we know about lateralized autonomic nerve anatomy. The brain-hemisphere coupling is credible but stands on narrower ground. Wernz and Shanahoff-Kalsa's original EEG studies were done with modest sample sizes. The contralateral relationship has been replicated by several groups, including a 2022 study in Scientific Reports, but some investigators have found weaker effects. The cognitive implications, sharper verbal performance during right nostril dominance, and better spatial reasoning during left, have directional support but have not been established with the same rigor as the cardiovascular findings. I would call this probable rather than proven. The nitric oxide physiology is exceptionally strong. Lundberg and Weitzberg's discovery in Nature Medicine has been confirmed independently around the world. It underpins the clinical nasal nitric oxide testing used today to diagnose primary ciliary dyskinesia. That the sinuses are high-output nitric oxide reservoirs, that nasal breathing delivers this gas to the lungs, that it has vasodilatory and antimicrobial effects there, these are established facts. The postural reflex is reproducible. The precise sensory pathway is still being mapped, but the phenomenon itself is not in dispute. And the idea that chronic single-side sleeping could meaningfully disrupt the nasal cycle over time, that is a reasonable hypothesis with a strong physiological basis, but it has not been tested in a controlled longitudinal study. So treat it as an inference, not a finding. Now let me show you where the money is. Because this is the part that makes you sit up. The molecule your sinuses produce for free, all day, every day, without a prescription, is the same molecule that hospitals deliver under the brand name Ionomax. Inhaled nitric oxide therapy. It is used in neonatal intensive care for newborns whose pulmonary blood vessels have failed to relax after birth. The molecule is identical. The pathway is identical. Soluble guanylate cyclase. Cyclic GMP. Smooth muscle relaxation. Same enzyme. Same second messenger. Same vascular outcome. When Ionomax was licensed in Europe, it was billed at £90 per hour, up to 96 hours per patient, up to £10,000 per treatment course. In the United States, $125 an hour. And when the same gas had been available as unbranded medical-grade nitric oxide in the UK a few years earlier, it cost about $2 per hour. After pharmaceutical branding, the price went up more than 60-fold. For the same molecule. Meanwhile, the global market for nasal decongestant sprays, the products that override the nasal cycle by forcing both turbinates to decongest at once, was worth roughly $26 billion in 2024. Oxymetazoline, xylometazoline, phenylephrine. These compounds mimic the sympathetic nerve signal that the hypothalamus was already sending on a schedule. They erase the alternation. They open both sides simultaneously. And if you use them for more than 5 to 7 days, the alpha-adrenergic receptors on the turbinate tissue downregulate. Rebound congestion. The medical term is rhinitis medicamentosa. The turbinates swell permanently because the receptors that should respond to the body's own signals have been desensitized by chronic pharmaceutical override. In bad cases, the tissue has to be surgically removed. Now, I have to be careful here. I am not telling you that breathing through your nose replaces an ICU ventilator. Your sinuses deliver nitric oxide at physiological maintenance concentrations, not at the clinical rescue doses used for a critically ill newborn. The dose is different. But the molecule is the same. The enzyme is the same. The second messenger is the same. What costs thousands of dollars a day in a hospital is a concentrated version of what your nose delivers for free with every breath, as long as the nasal cycle is allowed to run. Think about the person who is 62 years old, who has been using oxymetazoline every morning and every night for 3 years because a doctor once mentioned it for seasonal allergies, and nobody ever reviewed whether it should continue. Who keeps a bottle on the nightstand? One in the car, one at work. Who cannot breathe through the nose without it? Who sleeps with the mouth open? Whose sinuses have not properly flushed their nitric oxide reserves in months? Whose blood pressure has crept up and been labeled age-related? Whose sleep is fragmented and shallow? Who has not had a vivid dream in longer than they can remember? That person is not broken. The turbinate tissue is swollen but alive. The hypothalamus is still sending its lateralized signals. The sinus epithelium is still producing nitric oxide. The whole system is intact. It is just locked. The signals are arriving at tissue that has been pharmacologically frozen, like a thermostat talking to a furnace whose vents have been sealed shut. You know what my mother used to say? She used to say, "Breathe through your nose." Whenever I was anxious, whenever something was hard, whenever I came inside breathing fast and upset, breathe through your nose. She did not know about inferior turbinate erectile tissue. She had never heard of constitutive nitric oxide synthase, or the lateralized ultradian rhythm of alternating cerebral hemispheric dominance. She did not know that nasal breathing creates airway resistance that keeps the alveoli slightly more inflated, improving gas exchange, that it draws nitric oxide from the sinus reservoirs into the lungs, that it maintains the pressure dynamics that keep the nasal cycle oscillating, that it delivers autonomic instructions to the brain, the heart, and the lungs all at once. That mouth breathing bypasses every single one of these mechanisms, every one. The air arrives unfiltered, unhumidified, carrying no sinus nitric oxide. The turbinates get no airflow signal. The sinuses do not flush. The cycle has nothing to work with. She also used to say, "Do not sleep on the same side all night. Turn over." She thought it was about blood circulation or something. The reasoning she gave was wrong. But the instruction was exactly right. Turning triggers the axillary reflex that resets nostril dominance, which resets hemispheric activation, which resets the ultradian rhythm that moves the brain through its repair and consolidation cycles. She was prescribing a physiological intervention. She called it common sense. So here is what I want you to do. Close your mouth. Breathe in through whichever nostril is open right now. Do not fight the one that is closed. It is supposed to be closed. It is doing its job. The cycle is running. Let it run. Now I want to know something from you. Right now, which nostril is your dominant one, and what were you doing when you checked?